Conflict between Indigenous people and Canadian governments. Before starting this project, I was able to come across documentary that present two different opinions in one subject. This case remained one of the most sensitive issues in Canadian culture. Before sharing my opinion on this documentary, let me tell you a little bit about Native Canadians. Unlike states, the Canadian government has chosen peaceful way to coexist with the Indigenous people permission to stay on this land. On the surface, the Canadian government seems to have solving problem peacefully, but the truth is not. They had a painful history. Vikings were first discovered Canada. Aboriginal people allowed Vikings to stay on the land for a while and taught them many ways to survive. At the first time, Aboriginal and Viking were very friendly. However, alcohol and disease brought in from the Vikings resulted in the deaths of many natives, and the natives expelled the Vikings. Shortly after, Columbus discovered this land, this continent. And then later, French people settled in and lived there. Later, British people came in, and British people and French people started to go to the war. British won the war and Canada became British colony. Indigenous people wanted to live in their hometown, where they have lived for generations by hunting and farming according to their traditional lifestyle. But the settler flowed in, even their simple wishes become impossible. Also, the government thought native could not raise their children socially. The government segregated their children from their families and forced them to learn European culture by sending boarding school. Later, we learn about terrible things happen in the boarding school through recent article and the news. It turns out that the indigenous Canadians have painful history of being invaded by many other countries. In particular, they were forced to lose their identity. The Canadian government apologized to the indigenous people for what it has been done in past in Canada. Natives suffered, however. The Canadian governments provide many welfare benefits and free money for monthly residents, so 90% of indigenous people doesn't have to work. Perhaps for this reason many indigenous people were addicted to drugs or alcohol or causing social problems. This seems to be a problem that Canadian has to be solved still. Due to aforementioned conflict between indigenous people and Canadian governments, the Daryl Knight incident also seemed to have a many whole Canadian uproar. Watching the two documentaries, my opinion could not be chosen, because this area that needs to be dealt with very sensitively. Two white policemen picked up Daryl Knight outside his uncle's apartment on January day before dawn. They took him to the isolated spot 3 miles outside Saskatoon. Police dropped him middle of nowhere. Knight watched the car drive off. The wind was whipping on that night, January 28, 2000, in Saskatchewan, where there had been sudden blizzard and temperature may drop to 40 degrees below zero. Somehow he managed to walk several miles to Queen Elizabeth Power Station, where the watchman led him from the cold. People were saying and mentioning about dark side of the city police force. Over the years, at least 5 frozen bodies of Aboriginal men have been found in the same area. There were always rumors the police had dropped them off, but there was nothing to prove until Daryl came back. Victims who died from hypothermia including Rudy Natchez, Lawrence Wenger, and Neil Stonechild. The Saskatoon police initially insisted these were isolated incidents. But in 2003, police chief Russell Sabo admitted that there was a possibility that the police had been dumping First Nation people outside the city for years. Many people were outraged, and Knight began to receiving death threats as well. Since then, hundreds of other Aboriginal people from across Canada have called the Native Law Center at the University of Saskatchewan and to tell their own stories and abuse. In Knight's case, Constable Dan Hatchen and Ken Munson of the Saskatoon Police Service were convicted of unlawful confinement in September 2001 and sentenced to 8 months in prison. They are now free. Watching documentary with two different opinions, it was difficult for me to stand one side. When I watched the first documentary, I unconditionally stood on the side of natives supporting their opinion. Also, seems to have react to the word people react to the word racism without even hearing the police opinion. But after watch the second documentary, I thought it was too complicated. It was difficult for the police to control people who respond based on inaccurate evidence. And as the sensitive part of being a native person became an issue, I thought that there was a part that made the case more inflated. Past year, the native Canadian had complained of mistreatment by police officers. However, 75% of the male prison population, 90% of the female prison population is Aboriginal, according to the government study. Based on this, the police had a prejudice against Indigenous people and treat them unfairly. However, when I watched the documentary defending the police, I saw the police knew the suffering of the Indigenous people more than anyone else, and they were trying to solve this sensitive problem peacefully. I'm not saying the police were good. They could have made a better action. However, this was not possible, and the entire Saskatoon Police Department was further criticized by Canadian governments. I think they're dismal and regrettable, but I think two policemen be held responsible for causing a lot of damage to a police department. I couldn't take the side of the police or native. Only accurate evidence can change my mind. Thank you. And here is a reference.